Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. We're breaking down the basics of all political issues and current political events so that you get to decide. Today on the show, Drew McKissick. Drew was elected state chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party in May of 2017. He is a Columbia, South Carolina-based conservative political strategist with over 35 years of experience in grassroots politics and a passion for teaching others how to make a difference in our political system. He's a veteran of numerous political campaigns as well as conservative issue campaigns and specializes in political strategy, planning, and organization. During his tenure as state chairman, the SCGOP has won more elections across South Carolina than at any time in the past 150 years. He served in elected and appointed positions within the Republican Party at all levels and in all aspects of the GOP's organization, as well as having been a member of the Electoral College in 2004, 12, 2020, and 2024. He served as co-chairman of the Republican National Committee from January 23 to March of 24. He's also authored many books on various aspects of political education, organization, lobbying, and campaigns, which provide tips on effective conservative activism. Most recently, the Grassroots 101 training series and how to plan a winning campaign. We are going to talk about that. Drew, that's a mighty impressive bio. You are
appreciate it.
one impressive guy.
Well, maybe I need a hobby.
It would probably be political campaigns. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Happy to.
I've been wanting to interview you for a long time, actually. So glad to get you in season 2 here.
That's all right. I'm here. I'm at your disposal.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. I heard you're a man of very few words, so I'm sure we're going to have a tricky time here today.
I don't know who told you that, but they lied to you.
Okay. Well, good. We want to hear the words. And this being politically basic, we want to break down basics of these issues. And so I think it is only appropriate that we start with an understanding of what the RNC is and how that differs from the state group, because you're the state chair of the party.
Correct.
So what's the difference?
Well, so basically political parties are organized like a pyramid. Okay, so you have, say, let's take South Carolina, for example. We have 2,300 plus precincts in South Carolina, precinct being basically where you go vote, that location geographically surrounding that place where you go vote. Then you have counties, and then you have the state, and then you have the national party. So you have maybe 200,000 plus precincts nationwide. Each of those precincts, depending on the state, the rules vary from state to state, how they go about organizing, but essentially you have committee people in each of those states, and they send someone who sits on basically what you could call a board of directors or committee. It varies again by title in different states who govern the affairs of the county party organization or the district party organization. They typically have a county chairman or a district chairman. That level elects delegates to usually your state convention. Your state convention elects officers, where I get elected state chairman, and then the state conventions elect delegates to your national convention, which obviously nominates our president. We just saw the Republican National Convention this past year. But you have, each state has 3 members on the Republican National Committee, the state chairman, a national committee man, and a committee woman. So that's 168 members, and I'm not challenged on how many states we have, because the territories actually get members as well. 168 members, and they elect the chairman and co-chair and the treasurer of the Republican National Committee.
Interesting. How did you get into this world? What led you to this position?
That's a good question. A lot of things. I mean, I got interested in politics and just issues, I guess probably a better way to put it, when I was young, in high school. I started writing letters to the editor, I think, when I was in 10th grade. That's a very teenage thing to do, right? Letters to the editor. But just issues of the day. I was during the Reagan administration, was very fascinated with President Reagan and caught up in a lot of the politics there of the day. And left high school, go to the College of Charleston, got involved in college Republicans, young Republicans, and then working in campaigns, and then with the party itself, and then working with campaigns again, and then in grassroots political groups, and then in lobbying, then campaigns, and with the party, and then with the lobbying, and then with the party again. So it's been, I like to put it this way. I've worked inside the building, if you will, and outside the building. I've been outside throwing rocks at the building, and then I've been inside catching the rocks. So you see the problem from both sides. The problem being one of participation. That's the big problem that we have in this country, and it's a perpetual problem. Politics is, as I like to say, spelled P-E-O-P-L-E. If you got no people, you got no organization, you got no party, you got no campaigns, you got no policies you like, you got more stuff to complain about. how do we get more people involved in what we're doing? And how do we solve the grievances of the people who are outside throwing the rocks? And how do we help the people who are on the inside catching the rocks actually build a more productive machine where we can translate things we believe into public policy?
Amazing. Well, you've had quite a thorough journey, I would say, which I'm sure makes you an outstanding state chairman.
Well, we've had a good run, no doubt about it, and you have a lot of good people working with you, county party leaders, state party leaders, staff, working with other campaigns. To me, it's always about focusing on fundamentals. Reince Priebus, who used to be Republican National Committee chairman, I remember saying one time, and I actually wrote this down when he said this, and he probably doesn't realize this, but it's probably been about 10 years or more, that there are a lot of things that parties could do. There's a very small list of things that only the party can do. And those are the things we have to be very good at. To me, that comes down to fundamentals. What are our fundamentals that we have to do well? And it doesn't matter if you are a county party organization, state party, national party, if you're running for school board, county council, Congress, or president of the United States. There are really only three political fundamentals. One, you have to have a message that resonates with people, and you have to communicate that message in a way that resonates with them, that they understand why this matters to me, and it will change their behavior. People get involved because of issues. Former Republican National Committee Chairman Lee Atwater, who is also from South Carolina, famously said, to the point where I've had a sign with this quote made up in my office for the last 20 years, he said, "Issues win campaigns." People care about issues. People get involved because of issues. They'll write checks because of issues, knock on doors, they'll make phone calls, they'll get mad, they'll get happy because of issues. And it can be potholes to the abortion issue, the whole range. What are you doing to communicate what we believe in our issue positions in a way that people are going to see those things as relevant, build a coalition that can actually win an election? That's communications. And two is the organizational end of things. What are we doing to organize? To organize to the point where we can identify our potential voters and we can turn them out, and we can actually turn out and build a winning coalition, get them to show up on election day or election month as we now have. And then the third thing is raising the money to make number one and number two possible. That's it. Rinse and repeat. Everything that we do should relate back to one of those three things, at least tangentially. I mean, there's a lot of other things occasionally we sort of get involved in, but anything that distracts you from those fundamentals, you're going to have a weakened operation, probably a less successful party organization. We relentlessly focus on those things. We drill that into everybody all the time at our state party meetings, committee meetings, and so forth. And then on top of that, I would say the best thing that a state chairman can do is get everybody who matters to the equation sitting around the table. They don't always have to agree, but everybody who can matter to do your job, to bring them all to the table, let them find the places where they can go be productive, whether they like one another or not, or agree with one another or not, rather than sometimes you have situations where people are, pushed aside or kept out or whatever. Your job's to win. State party chairman's job is to run a political campaign. And if everything that we're doing is not oriented around winning, why are we here? You've got a lot of wonderful political organizations in this country. We're here at CMP now, represent a lot of great groups who do a lot of great things. It just kind of blows the mind, the different things that people focus on and do well. But if the party didn't exist, we would all be sitting around one evening at dinner having drinks and saying, we ought to start a committee that just focuses on winning campaigns, because we need to win to translate policy, or what we believe rather, into policy. And that's the role of the parties play.
How many campaigns are you helping with and running and supporting, would you say, at any given time? I mean, or in a year? I mean,
it varies cycle to cycle. So we don't have typically a lot of off-year campaigns to South Carolina, unlike, say, Virginia or New Jersey or states like that. Some local stuff, school board races and so forth, in some areas of the state are on odd calendars. Municipal races, we'll have a few this year. Our big action is in the election years. Next year in 2026, we have an open race for governor, attorney general, treasurer, comptroller, agriculture commissioner, 5 open statewide races. So a very important cycle for us because you have all these incumbents stepping down. or who have, the governor in his case is term limited. He's the only one that's term limited. For me as a party chairman, so we have every single statewide constitutional office in South Carolina as a Republican. Both U.S. Senate seats, 6 out of 7 congressional seats. The last thing that you want to do is to blow one of those down ballot races and let Democrats get a foothold, and then they get someone who has name recognition next time around who can maybe threaten for governor later on down the road. Your job, when you got them down, is keep them down. And again, as I pointed out earlier, politics is about people. That means a lot of egos. And, people sometimes have asked me, why this random stupid thing happens in politics. The answer is usually somebody's ego. Comes back to pride. And we deal with that everywhere in life. Politics is no different. I'd say probably it's even worse because, you have to have a little bit of ego to pay a filing fee and run for office and think that you're the best person for this job. Some of them get double dipped. It makes it a little bit more difficult. But navigating the personalities and making sure we do what we need to do to win is important.
You say politics is about people, and I always say people ruin everything. If something's getting ruined, it's usually because of some human somewhere. Right. So interesting. I appreciate the way you're explaining the organization of this. But you have all of these outside organizations and PACs and things involved. Is it a little bit like herding cats sometimes?
It can be, because largely as Republicans, we agree mostly on what we want to do. We don't always agree on how we want to do it. And some of them get a little bit more dug into their positions sometimes than they ought to. Or think a little bit more of themselves and their ideas maybe than they should. We need maybe some more people who would take, Ben Franklin's advice when they had the Constitutional Convention, and he, pointed out that, we all probably need to think maybe just a little bit less of ourselves and be willing to compromise on some things, in terms of how we get things done. That's true in legislation, no doubt about it, and it is a lot like herding cats. But the danger that we have always is to continue to be a successful party is we've got to deliver. Now we have gone out, we've sold a message, we've organized, identified, and turned out the voters. We've won an election. Well, now what are you going to do to actually translate that into policy to make the people happy who just voted for you? And if you spend too much time, arguing over how we're going to do it, then you don't get it done, and then you have to face them again in 2 years. And, you have the same challenge now in Congress. Obviously, Donald Trump's been elected. We're 40 days in now, I think, maybe. It seems like a year already with all the things that have been done. But, Congress has got a job to do. And Donald Trump knows that he is basically, to borrow a basketball phrase, he's on an 18-month shot clock right now. We've got midterms coming up in 18 months. We've got to be able to translate the things that he campaigned on into tangible policy, into wins. So that those people who voted for us are going to give him another 2 years worth of help in Congress. If we lose the House or we lose the Senate, then the fruitfulness of the last 2 years of his administration will be cut drastically, unfortunately. So our job, translated into policy and win. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about 2026 because we're in 2025 already. It's going pretty quickly, and I think nationally we all need a collective period of rest after we have a presidential election. Every election cycle and big one, I think there's so much ramp up, there's so much emotion and so much energy spent. And so it's natural to want to, just take that collective deep breath and rest. But that is not how things have been going. Things have not calmed. They have only maybe even sped up and revved up just a little bit. So let's talk about 26. It is going to be a really big midterm year. And I'm anticipating more people will be paying attention to midterms next year than they normally do, just because I want your take on this. I have generally, as a generalist and kind of taking the temperature and all of these issues and all of these topics, get these threads. And it just seems like people are having a sense that maybe every presidential election is going to be a critical one. the end of the West as we know it, should it go a certain way, the end of democracy, or the end of our Constitution.
It's the most important election in our lifetime.
It is, yeah. It seems like this one particularly, we're seeing political parties, the divide grow, and there was this infographic once, and it was so impactful to look at the two political parties and how they have moved away from each other over the decades and over the course of the history of the United States. And they used to overlap quite a lot, right? And as the years went on, you see this, and it just kind of moves, and the little circles get farther and farther away. What do you think about that? Does it feel like to you, in your sense of things, that it is that critical, and we have a lot at risk, a lot at stake?
A couple of things. First off, again, you always hear the phrase in every cycle, this is the most important election in our lifetime. And you always hear that, and it is usually almost always true.
Yeah.
The reason being because the stakes have gotten higher and higher with just about each passing election year. I mean, just think back for a minute. I mean, think about the things that we were talking about in this election. You wouldn't have taken a bet that we would be having conversations about those kind of issues 10 years ago. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But things have moved further and further apart. I would argue that the Democrat Party has moved faster and further to the left than the Republican Party has to the right. Mm-hmm. And to the point where they have, in a lot of ways, because of that, enabled a lot of our success, because people are now looking at them and going like, no, I'm not for that. And it's largely been at the national party level, but that makes it harder for them to, or the people at, let's say, the state party level and state level candidates to escape the, quite frankly, the stink that gets on the national party. It becomes problematic for them. Since I first got involved, I've seen what I call, you hear political scientists talk about the term realignment occasionally, and there have been and the definition sometimes of what they call a realignment election sometimes differs and so forth. They would call FDR and what happened there with the New Deal a realignment, which secured basically a 40-year span of power for the Democrat Party in D.C. What we've been seeing, in my opinion, and it's been over the course of really the time that I've been able to be involved. I got involved in the late 80s. One of the things that also drew me out into the party at that time, Pat Robertson's running for president. I was very attracted to that, got involved in that campaign. You saw a lot of evangelical conservatives at that time move into the Republican Party. So it broadened the actual, the number of people who were attracted to the party at that point. Reagan enlarged the party. You hear the term Reagan Democrats. You think about the Rust Belt and some of those folks you came across. You think about back in the late 60s when Nixon ran, and then up into 72, and the Southern strategy, as they call it, and how he, broke into the South. Instead of the South being solid Democrat territory, it began to be more reliable Republican territory because of a lot of those cultural and social issues. Again, fast forward to when Robertson comes in. We have the Christian Coalition. A lot of those folks moving to get involved in local county party structures. That's how I got involved. And then you go forward again, and you see the tinge of the populist movement begin to start with Ross Perot, and then Pat Buchanan, then a little bit with even Rick Santorum and his messaging when he was running, a little bit with Mike Huckabee. And then along comes Donald Trump. And what we've seen with each of those is the pool of people in this country that the Republican Party could attract got larger. The what I would call loosely the conservative coalition got larger with each successive, wave. The thing about waves come in and they hit the beach, and then the wave goes back out. But what's important is what does the wave leave on the beach? And that's a lot of the people like myself and others like me, and each of those movements who've come in got in the party and stayed. And the party kept getting broader, more representative, just conservatism at large. And then you juxtapose that with what the Democrat Party has done. And just, leave people looking wild-eyed.
I mean, what is the Democrat Party doing? Can we touch on that for a moment? They're certainly in crisis. Their leadership is. We saw total chaos in their attempts to elect a vice chair. No one had seen their actual chair during the entire presidential election. I mean, truly, people were like, who's that guy? I mean, it was just remarkable. And then they bring David Hogg in, and he's repeating the same exhausted platitudes from 2016. I mean, it's just, what's happening?
Radical progressives are in total control of the Democrat Party. At the national level, definitely. I don't know about all the state parties around the country. I mean, in South Carolina, it's not quite as bad, I would say. You know, some there actually do have some common sense, somewhat, or at least a desire to win and not alienate, you know, all the voters. At the national level, they don't care. You know, what they care about is progressivism and whatever, you know, new moniker they want to, you know, use to describe it. Basically, it's packaged socialism, and they're radicals. And they have gained control of the different levers and so forth within the National Democrat Party in those positions. They're not giving them up. They can't be told that they're wrong or that they lost. They never lost. It's never their fault. It's because of something else. Or, you know, when Trump won in 2016, well, it's all Russia.
Sure.
You know, so they can't ever let it be that people disagreed with them, that they don't buy what they're selling. But they're not. That's the problem they have.
Is it a money issue? Are they being funded? How are they maintaining that control?
Well, so interesting you bring up funding, though. I mean, look at one of the first things that Donald Trump did when he came in the door. I've argued to folks recently, I think Donald Trump is going to be a better second-term president now than he would have been 4 years ago because of the experience he's gained, the things that he's seen, the lessons he's learned, either the hard way or not the hard way. One of the first things that he did when he came in the door was what? Basically taking U.S. aid and pulling it up by the roots and taking what pieces of it actually matter, put it under Marco Rubio in the State Department. That organization had a budget bigger than the CIA and the FBI combined. And what have we found out? Well, huge percentages of it were basically funding the institutional left. So, I mean, if you're getting ready to fight a major battle, what's one of the first things that you should do if you're actually thinking ahead? Defund, de-resource your opposition. That's what they've been able to do now. And I think it's going to be maybe years before we really realize the impact of that on the political battles that we're going to be having now. You know, it's hard to really get that 50,000-foot view right now. But to me, that's critical. I mean, those are the people who've been in the trenches, you know, or in the trees with sniper rifles, metaphorically, you know, basically trying to take everybody out. And to defund them now is going to make it that much harder for them to win their battles, easier for us to win the next battle.
Is that sort of a bigger open door for Republican candidates nationally to look at 2026? Maybe they weren't thinking that their Democrat opponent or incumbent was beatable before because of the funding, and now maybe there's some opportunity there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, well, I'll say this. When it comes to the candidates running for office, usually that's some of the last things they think about. Usually the first thing, I mean, look, like I said, ego drives a lot of this, 100%. They see opportunity and ego will drive them, and that's okay, especially to the extent that they're productive and they're good candidates and they can communicate. Fine. I mean, we can't win races without candidates. I thank God every day for people who are willing to do something like that and run for office. My job is to convince them to do that. And it's difficult for them now. I mean, you have this wonderful thing called social media where people say all manner of nice things about you that they wouldn't say in church. And it hurts them, hurts their family. So it's difficult. But look, I mean, it's, you know, a race like that is going to attract candidates like moths to a flame. I don't doubt that we'll have great candidates running. We've got a good bench. They do not have a good bench. And as we saw with the last, I mean, they end up first off going through the last cycle and they come up with Joe Biden. And then they finally try to throw Biden overboard. And who do we have? Kamala Harris. I mean, they have no bench. That's their big problem.
Let's talk about the bench. Who are we liking for 28?
Well, we've got good, again, a lot of good potential candidates. Obviously, J.D. Vance will be in the mix. I think Governor Youngkin in Virginia is someone who could certainly be in the mix. We've got a lot of folks in the Senate, I know, who've been interested in the past, from Ted Cruz to others going forward. Ron DeSantis is still out there. These are people who, they're experienced political campaigners, and they are good at communicating a message. Now, those are two things that you don't often get in the same candidate. And they're good at that. That bodes well for us. Where does the party go going forward? Probably the biggest determinative factor with all of that will be how the next 18 months go. If we do what we need to do in the next 18 months and Congress does what it needs to do, we're going to have a good midterm election. And then that will probably have a lot more to do with what proceeds from there.
Who's the left going to put forward?
That's an even better question. They won't always do the smart thing. The better question is who should they put forward? Probably.
Sure, that's true. Well, we can split those into two.
So, I mean, you go back to the decision they had just last year. They went with Kamala Harris. Okay, well then after that, who's she going to pick as the running mate? Now the smart move would have been take the guy from Pennsylvania.
Sure.
But he's too moderate. We can't do that, so we got to make the left happy. Well, the left already runs the party, for goodness sake. Why do we need to make them happy? What are they going to do? Vote for Donald Trump? I think one of the funniest things I've been able to watch over the course of the last year has been the video rantings of James Carville,
right.
Just at the Democrat Party. He's like, and of course they're usually semi or completely profane. Was like, what are you doing? This is crazy. You're alienating people. I mean, here you got a guy who's won a couple of presidential races, and thank goodness they didn't take his advice. But what do they have left? Who should they take? Again, they should take someone, in my opinion, who doesn't alienate people, who doesn't alienate middle America. I mean, you've got the left. You're not going to get the far right. You got to go for the middle if you're in their shoes. Who could help you do that? Well, Gavin Newsom that's California. Good luck selling California to the rest of the country. I mean, it would probably be some middle of the country governor that we're not thinking about right now, most likely, who doesn't have a track record on these issues of just doing crazy things. Like
we're still looking at Pennsylvania, right?
Potentially.
We're still looking at Josh Shapiro. I just wonder.
Potentially.
We're still playing this game. Who does the left have? Who to watch out for and how to prepare for that? But you're right, it's shallow as anything.
It's very shallow, and again, that puts them behind the eight ball because if you don't have a good candidate, you're not going to win an election usually.
Yeah.
Unless you cheat.
Well, that's a really interesting comment. Yeah. We're still working through some feelings from 2020 and other years. Obviously, being from California, that's not a new occurrence of extending ballot counting for many days and finding just a few more than the threshold. Now, at the national level, at the RNC, there was a change. Ronna McDaniel left, and we have Michael Whatley and Lara Trump come in, with really a lot of attention being paid to potential fraud and funny business happening on Election Day. What do you think about how they operated this last year?
They did very good. So I was on the RNC's Election Integrity Committee after the 2020 election. So basically, we put together, I think it was probably about 19 or 21 members of that committee. It broke up into several different areas of interest, from the machines and the technology to the legal side to the legislative side, and what do we need to fix and where? How do we go about it? And came back with basically three areas that we were looking at, and that was going to be, again, just the technology. And one thing I'll say about machines and arguments about machines and so forth, aside from what our good friend Cleta Mitchell says is, the last thing any of these machines need to be is connected to the internet.
Right.
But, aside from that, the most important piece of election machinery is a person, having the right person sitting on the other side of that table checking voters in. That's number one. On the legal front, though, doing to the left what the left has done to us, which is to just break out the lawyers and make everybody live the whole election year in court. That's what they had done to us repeatedly, and we hadn't organized an effective counterattack, if you will, up until this, to a great degree in 22, and then much, much better in 24. And then third is on the legislative side. What laws do we need to address and where, and are they in states where we have the levers of power and we can actually change laws? So, Georgia made changes to their election laws. A lot of other states did in 21, 22, and 23. South Carolina did. We didn't have the problems that a lot of other states had in the 2020 cycle. But the way our laws were written, some of those things could have been done to us if they had tried to. So we come in, We made 14 different changes to our election laws there and got that passed, and everything's been great. But in places where you don't control the legislature, then again, that takes you back to the lawsuits and making them just live their lives in court and making their lives miserable. And then doing what you can on the ground with the manpower, poll watching, where you can get people into the poll working aspect on the other side of the table. All that's critical. And the RNC did a much better job in the 24 cycle, focusing on that at a broader scale. I mean, really, it was just taking a lot of what we had done previously and then taking it to scale to the degree that we could. Our problem, part of the RNC's problem was up until 3.5 to 4 years ago, the RNC was legally prohibited from being involved in election day security, or what we call election security operations. That goes back to a lawsuit from the 1982, I think, or 83, New Jersey, maybe it was a governor's race. Somebody in the campaign there did something they weren't supposed to do, and they got under a consent decree that the RNC would not do election integrity operations for the next election cycle or whatever. Well, the judge that oversaw that case, every election cycle, every 5 years or however long that consent decree would last, he would constantly renew it, and did that right up until the Lord promoted him to the great hereafter about 3.5 years ago. That's how we got under or out from under that consent decree and are able then to legally engage in election day security. Without the RNC being able to do that over the course of almost 40 years, it was largely farmed out to either the presidential campaign or in some cases state parties. The problem is a lot of this is institutional memory. State parties had people constantly coming and going and so forth. Presidential campaigns are hiring people off the street 6 months out from the election. You need an institution like the RNC that has the institutional memory and the people there with the experience to be able to do it cycle after cycle. That makes a big difference.
Wow. So, but Republicans have won the White House in that time when they were under that decree. Do you think the fraud was just escalating during that time, so that kind of when we got to maybe 2020, it was that tipping point?
You had a lot of things that have changed over that course of time. You had, back in Bill Clinton's term, the Motor Voter Act passes, I think, in 93, I believe it was. Vastly expanding voter rolls, and then not cleaning up voter rolls. A lot of that just gradually gotten sloppier and worse, intentionally so. And you had just a confluence of bad procedure, bad law, and then you had bad actors come in and look to exploit those weaknesses, in many cases with tens and tens of millions of dollars. That causes a problem.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are worried about where Lara Trump will go, meaning should she leave the RNC and what's going to happen at that level, believing they did a good job, and will we have that those same levels of protection, I guess, and watching in 2028?
Oh, I'm sure we will. I know in her case, she's already gone from the RNC, so we've elected, we reelected Whatley as chairman. We have a new co-chair now. But again, this goes back to what I just referenced a minute ago in terms of the institutional memory of the people who are there, who've done this now. More of them have done it now at a greater scale. More of them have the experience, and when the new staff comes in, that this is the things that they begin to teach one another and then to work with state parties and state campaigns on. You'll see a lot of that even ramped up this year in your let's see, I believe it's New Jersey and one other state, or Virginia, have their elections this year. Typically what happens is those races end up being testing grounds for a lot of new procedures and so forth that we're looking to roll out nationwide in the following election year. You'll see a lot of that. But there's no going back to where we were in the past at all. The RNC and the members of the RNC firmly committed to keeping that going. The Election Integrity Committee is still an ongoing committee in the RNC. I'm still on that committee. And we get together every time the RNC meets and we have these discussions.
Well, that's good to hear. That's reassuring. Do you think there's some danger right now in a little bit of resting on our laurels in the Republican Party? And
totally.
While we're watching the Democrats, scramble a bit, they could get it together. They could get it together quickly and have some Obama-esque, someone come from obscurity and be a rising star. How do you insulate against that?
Well, first off, one thing you have to remember, you can't control what your opposition does. You can control what you do or what you don't do. And we get a lot of people who spend too much time getting worried about the other guys. And I'm not saying we don't want to be aware. We need situational awareness, don't get me wrong, but we need to be more mindful of what we're doing or not doing and how we're doing it. That's one thing. Secondly, I spent a lot of time going around the country working with other RNC members in my time as co-chair, red states, blue states, et cetera. And I tell them all, I tell our folks back in South Carolina, there's no such thing as a permanent red state or district or permanent blue state or district. All there is the next election. That's it. And you're either ready for it or you're not. You're going to do bad or you're going to do well. You're going to be heading in a good direction or a bad direction. That's how they changed. South Carolina was a cobalt blue state up until really the early 80s in a lot of ways. We voted Republican for president since Eisenhower, except for the mistake with the guy from Georgia back in '76. But other than that, people from afar were looking, South Carolina's electing Republican presidents. Well, yeah, but you still had people who were voting Democrat for U.S. Senate or Congress and governor and so forth, and they were splitting their ticket. And the line where they were splitting their ticket kept moving further and further down the ballot. Up until, just 8 years ago, Democrats in South Carolina still controlled 56% of all local partisan elected officials. Just 8 years ago. Today, we have 62% as Republicans. But any of that can change. And you can sit there and win a lot of races and then look around and not have anybody Democrats left to fight with and suddenly decide, well, now we need to fight. Well, no, that's how you end up getting divided. And you get divided, you start losing. And that's something people have to keep in mind.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I think it's fascinating. We're watching kind of the breakdown and rebuilding. In a way, we watched that happen with the Republican Party this last year, and now we might be seeing it happen this year with the Democrat Party. So it's really, really interesting.
And, we'll see what they learn.
Yeah.
Again, it's either going to be hidebound in just a socialist dogma and decide we're in charge and we're going to keep the hammer down and go right over the cliff, or maybe somebody will jerk the wheel for them. I don't know.
We're not seeing too much wheel jerking right now, so
no, we're not.
We got a little ways to go, though. There are a couple of positions and groups that and really the terminology of this that I'm not sure everyone understands too well, so if you would be so kind. Okay. I want to ask you about PACs and super PACs. Sure. Can you break that down? What are those? Okay,
political action committees, that's PACs, and they've been around a long time. So if you go back, all this is really came about because of what is politely known as federal campaign election law, which basically makes it almost impossible to really participate in politics without the help of a lawyer, just to be honest about it. And it created campaign political action committees under the classic definition of groups that could give candidates up to $5,000. So that's a group of people who will come together. We create a committee, and we're raising money, and we give you $5,000, you $5,000, you $5,000. That trucks on for a good bit of time. Then we ended up with the McCain-Feingold bill back in, I think, 2002, which made things even more complicated and put stricter limits on money that the national party could raise and how it could work to help elect this presidential candidate, or how the Senate committee and congressional committee could work to elect congressional candidates and Senate candidates. State parties. Our state party in South Carolina, every other state party around the country, can only take a maximum of $10,000 from any individual, and that has to go in a federally regulated campaign account. And that dollar amount has not been indexed for inflation, so basically it's worth half of what it was when they passed the law back in 2002. Right. Then you go forward to lawsuits against the McCain-Feingold bill that some folks brought. Citizens United was the famous one. And you have the Supreme Court step in and say, well, no, that shouldn't apply to these guys. They should be able to raise and spend whatever they want, which is great. Problem is they didn't come to the same conclusion for the parties. So effectively now, that's where you have the origin of the super PAC. It's a political action committee, a group of individuals that can raise and spend unlimited money. And then over here you have the parties with this little regulated dollar amounts that we have. Right. And the practical impact of that has been it has made the parties a smaller player in the political game, the campaign game. You have the super PACs, all these candidates have people give $50 or $100 million over here, but over here they can only give $100,000 to the RNC or 125 or whatever it ends up being indexed for inflation. And then the lower dollar amounts for the state parties. And it makes the parties, which are the organizations that represent all these grassroots voters, more of a bit player in what's going on, rather than letting them jump in and participate, take unregulated money, and just put it out there for full disclosure. Let everybody know who's giving. That's fine. But in my mind, it's an imbalance in what we have now. And in the long term, if it doesn't get fixed, it's going to, I think, create bigger problems.
So if someone like a George Soros wants to influence a congressional candidate, say, he can just write a check to a super PAC, drop off a briefcase of cash. Like, what's the limit? What are
For super PACs, there is no limit. The sky's the limit. And I mean, again, and it is, it goes, there's a lot of different case law involved in all of it. Basically, fundamentally, it comes down to this, that the Supreme Court recognizes that money is speech. That's you speaking. I'm giving money to transmit my message, whether it's I want to put ads on TV saying that you're a great candidate or, whatever message I want to put out there. The problem is, though, again, that the actual political committees whose job it is to help push candidates, up and down the ballot, don't have the same ability that those PACs do, which might have a narrower focus. Maybe it's, again, just around a certain interest that they have in a certain bill or something like that. And it makes candidates too likely, or more likely, I would say, to cater now to super PACs than they do to the parties to whom they owe the badge that they represent on the ballot. So some of them will basically wear a Republican label, almost like a lapel pin or a sticker, take on and off. It means about that much to them. Those are the ones that I have a problem with. If you're going to wear our badge, if you will, you're going to have that R by your name, you need to represent the party. That means you need to work with the party and help the party be successful.
Do you think that the average voter understands this in that context? So if you are choosing between candidates and one has gone out and knocked on doors and, done the work and got the $100 donations and amassed the war chest of a few million, and then the person on the other side just has a super PAC give them a check for a few million. Right. Do you think the voters understand the implications of that?
It depends on how good of a job the other candidate does in trying to get that point across. Now, and obviously, if they know what they're doing, they will. And I'll say this though, and this we noticed this in the 2020 election in South Carolina. So Senator Lindsey Graham at the time was running in the general election against who's the former chair of the DNC now, Jamie Harrison. Jamie Harrison and Democrats raised and spent about $140 million in South Carolina in that campaign. The most money they had previously ever spent for a Democrat was $8 million.
Goodness.
$140 million.
That's wild.
Lindsey's campaign raised and spent, I think, about 90. Point was, at the end of that campaign, it was diminishing returns. You couldn't buy any more TV time. They had bought it all, and it was all white noise at that point. It was so bad that I went down to Charleston, go to a meeting. I'm driving back to Columbia. I stop at a gas station, and I'm pumping gas, and I hear Jamie Harrison's voice behind me. I turn around. They've got ads on the gas pumps. He's like, you've run out of places to put TV ads. Yeah. It made you feel for the trial lawyers who are usually all over television. But eventually it becomes white noise, and I think it's diminishing returns.
That's fascinating. Yeah. People just absolutely hate those TV ads. I hate to tell you. I know it's a part of it, but we only have so much tolerance for them.
That's true. That's true.
And I endorse this message. Okay. Thank you for explaining that.
Sure.
The other concept that I was going to have you explain is what a lobbyist is and what lobbying means. We hear this terminology all the time, and it's just helpful to hear what it actually is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would say first off, I think in a lot of ways in politics, lobbyists get a bad reputation because at the end of the day, everybody's a lobbyist. And if you've got an opinion, you're a lobbyist. What paid lobbyists are people who get paid by larger groups of people who have an opinion, who are trying to get that opinion represented in front of elected officials. Politics is a complicated business. Legislation is a complicated business. How the legislative procedure operates is complicated. And these are folks who understand how the process works. They get hired by somebody to represent their opinion. What are we involved in politics for if we don't have opinions? I've worked as a grassroots lobbyist many times, helping local political groups actually figure out how to apply direct grassroots pressure on elected officials rather than the paid lobbyist type.
Right.
So you have grassroots lobbying and paid lobbying, similar but different. But at the end of the day, it's somebody trying to get an opinion in front of people who have the ability to influence that opinion. And that's what the political process is all about. I think, the Lord put us in a system of government where we can have an impact over how we are governed. And to the extent that we don't take advantage of that, we're probably being ungrateful.
Yeah, well, I'll agree with that. Thank you for breaking that down. Sure. Well, I've only got you for a couple more minutes, but okay. I want to ask you about your book, the Grassroots 101 Training Series, and you wrote How to Plan a Winning Campaign. Give us the quick and dirty. How do you plan a winning campaign? TikTok.
Well, it goes back to me again to those fundamentals, and they are fundamental because they're fundamental. And I don't say that to be funny. It's easy for people to forget and get too confused or too distracted doing things that could be important, but aren't fundamental to the whole operation. And so it goes back to what kind of work that you do, again, to plan out your message. So for instance, how to have a good political elevator pitch. You've got limited attention spans out there. If you're running for the local, city council spot, but you've got county council races, state house, state senate, congressional races, and everything else, people have a limited amount of time to pay attention to politics in general, much less you running for a city council spot. When you get that opportunity, how are you getting your message across, and is it in a way that actually penetrates and that it is relevant to them? And then moving on to the organizational side, who you're hiring and why you're hired and what type of jobs you just want to give, what kind of jobs need to be divvied up in a campaign so that you have people focusing on the things that need to be done, from scheduling to, you name it, yard signs, whatever. And then the fundraising side, who are you putting in charge of that? What type of events are you going to have? What kind of list do you have? Do you need to go buy more lists? Have you gone through your Christmas card list yet? Certain fundamental things that people will skip, forget about, and they want to go do the interviews, but they don't want to do the prep work that's going to get them there, where they're going to be able to be effective when they get further on down the line. Those things are critical, and people overlook them, and as a result, we lose races we don't need to lose.
Yeah, interesting. I hope my listeners go run out and buy your books, because I do think it's a great time of opportunity for people to think about offices at the local level and starting to offer themselves to their local party.
Sure.
And try to get involved in fulfilling their civic duty in that way.
Well, I'll say this. Local races are what I call the farm team of American politics. Everybody's looking at who's running for Congress today. Well, those guys were probably running for a state house or state senate seat 8 years ago. And the folks who are running for state house and state senate seats today were probably running for a school board seat 8 years ago. This is where we need to focus. And on top of that, because turnout in those races is usually so abysmally small, a small group of people who are well organized with a good bit of resources, or even moderate resources, but who focus, can usually go in and win those lower level races. And now you've got a candidate that you can work with over the years and potentially try to move them up the ladder as you go forward. So, people overlook the local races because they don't get all the attention they want. I understand that. But they do spend a lot of your tax money. So you need to pay attention to it.
That's true. Very important. Well, Drew, thank you. This has been really interesting, so informative. I'm just really glad to hear your take at that level. It's fascinating. You're really boots on the ground of how this all comes together for the Republican Party. So I thank you, sir, for being with us today and for the time, and hope we can continue some of these conversations beyond today.
Look forward to it.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so that you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.